Ms. Teresa Ganson and Mr. Lawrence Chong, co-conveners for EOC Asia Pacific, participants in this inaugural summit of the EOC Asia Pacific Network, good afternoon. On the 30th anniversary of the Economy of Communion, we have chosen the theme of Life, Light, Leaven. How do we measure the worth of our lives? By being willing to shine the light of hope amid the fear, anxiety, and desolation wrought by the pandemic. At this summit, we are mobilizing our collective intellectual leaven. We are joining hands to transform our world for the better. COVID-19 has reshaped political, socio-economic conditions, raising the urgency for a rethink of the economic system. According to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, or ESCAP, the pandemic has spawned the worst crisis in Asia-Pacific since World War II. Widespread job losses and worsening of poverty have plunged our economies into deep recession. The focus of the summit is inclusion, and rightly so. In 2016, or long before the onset of COVID-19, a group of scholars described the huge chasm between the haves and the have-nots. The 1.2 billion poorest people account for 1% of global consumption, and 1 billion richest consume 75% of global GDP. In a measure of extreme absurdity, the 62 richest people in the world have amassed the same wealth as the poorest 3.6 billion. Half of the world is owned by no more than a tiny elite whose members could all sit comfortably in a train carriage, while those at the bottom of the pyramid are struggling to meet their basic needs. This is how the stark inequality in our region is described by economists. The region's combined income inequality, measured by the Gini coefficient, has increased by over 5 percentage points in the last 20 years, contrary to almost all other regions. Income inequalities grew in almost 40% of all countries. China, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Singapore experienced sharp increases. In simple terms, the net worth of the region's billionaires was more than 7 times the combined GDP of the region's least developed countries. How did we get to where we are now? In current history, every year in time is Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. Before AD, the calendar years were reckoned as BC, or before Christ. In the book Real Wealth of Nations, Rian Eisler pointed out that the original orthodoxy was symbolized by the chalice, Christ sharing his blood for the redemption of mankind. Then the exploration of the vast oceans led to conquests. Global empires were established. Control of vast resources from the land and the seas was achieved and maintained by the force of arms. The blade replaced the chalice as the symbol of power. Domination became the new orthodoxy. The capitalist corporation became the principal engine of economic growth. Scale production became the principal driver of growth. The wealth of nations was measured by gross domestic product and gross national product. 2 world wars were fought to determine which countries would rule the world. Capitalism won each time. Fast forward to the last decade of the 20th century. Nature's vengeance unmasked unbridled capitalism. Climate change triggered natural disasters that ravaged the poorest nations. Ultra-high levels of carbon emission from the largest nations continued to rise. Inevitably, the winds of change blew mightily, inviting consideration of change scenarios and options. Is it still possible to reform the present system? Or must there be more serious consideration of a change in system, a change in paradigm? Stirrings of reform began to be felt, even as participants at the annual World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, marveled at the dizzying pace of digital transformation that has ushered in the fourth industrial revolution. They too came to terms with the imperatives of environment, sustainability, and governance. In December 2020, an extraordinary meeting took place at the Vatican. 27 CEOs of large global corporations were gently reminded by Pope Francis to include the excluded and work with the poor. They formed the Guardians of Inclusive Capitalism, a group of individuals and institutions with more than 10.5 trillion US dollars in assets and companies, with a combined market capitalization of more than $2 trillion and 200 million employees in 163 countries. They joined together to include the excluded in the capitalist system and wanted Pope Francis as their torchbearer. Ahead of inclusive capitalism, the term stakeholder capitalism had emerged. Essentially, it is an advocacy for aligning the financial interests of the owners of enterprise with those of other stakeholders. And then there was some special mention of doing something for lower income communities. Paul Polman, Unilever CEO from 2009 to 2019, is the prime example of the power of one, what a single company can do when led by an enlightened CEO. Unilever pivoted and re-engineered its businesses, reaching 1.3 billion people through health and hygiene programs, reducing the total waste footprint per consumer use of products by 32% and achieving zero waste to landfill across all factories, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing by 65% and 100% renewable grid electricity across sites, reducing sugar across all sweetened tea-based beverages by 23%, and 56% of foods portfolio now meets recognized high nutrition standards, enabling 2.34 million women to access initiatives aiming to promote their safety, develop their skills, or expand their opportunities, move towards a gender-balanced workplace in which 51% of management roles are held by women. Indeed, that's the power of one giant multinational corporation led by an enlightened CEO. Brands with purpose grow. Companies with purpose last. People with purpose thrive. Let me now tell you about Glacier, a chain of cold storage facilities in the Philippines. After establishing plants in several major regional centers of the country, Glacier set up a plant in northern Samar. About 37% of families in northern Samar, just like those in the rest of the island, are considered poor. The owners of Glacier established a pioneer plant as an intentional poverty reduction initiative to raise farm incomes and to lower the cost of food. This is a sterling example of enlightened governance, of inclusive capitalism. From Unilever and Glacier, we have gleaned powerful examples of a paradigm shift. Clearly, there is need to replace the dominator paradigm and restore the partnership paradigm. From the dominator paradigm of cutthroat competition and survival of the fittest, from capitalism as the unbridled accumulation of wealth, we could glean the manifestations of a new paradigm of inclusion, sharing, and caring. While we acknowledge that the concepts of inclusive capitalism are beneficial, we must also realize that these would not bring about an end to inequality. We need to acknowledge the contribution of the following in the creation of the real wealth of nations: mothers who give birth to and raise children, volunteers and activists who work for social and economic equity and advocate the protection of the environment for sustainable development. Allow me to focus on the work of Gawad Kalinga in harnessing the faith and generosity of Filipinos the world over to confront poverty in their homeland and to provide every Filipino the dignity of a decent home and neighborhood. Gawad Kalinga believes in building a nation one community at a time, and this takes place through a three-part process: restoring dignity, empowering communities, caring for resources, empowering families to build their own brightly colored homes. GK provides these families with basic needs like land, food, and security, bringing dignity back to the lives of the poor. Gawad Kalinga then links communities to partners that help them plan and implement the programs that address sickness, hunger, and education. The partners also connect impoverished individuals to government resources that provide longer-term sustainable support. By helping community members take on leadership roles and provide for their own future, GK is building communities from the ground up and tackling poverty at the base level. Every year since 2006, Gawad Kalinga has been conducting a Bayani Challenge, Youth Camp. In view of the pandemic, this year's Bayani Challenge is designed to enable civic-spirited Filipinos to participate in place and to internalize the causes being espoused through voluntary, personal acts or good deeds. Through 9 weeks leading to the celebration of Philippine Independence Day in June, the focus is on attaining freedom in the following aspects: freedom from sickness, illiteracy, pollution, financial constraints, food insecurity, lack of usable water, hunger, apathy, and freedom towards positive change. Each of the freedoms celebrated weekly provides a platform for individual action, framed as personal acts of courage or valor, or simply self-improvement. Little acts of kindness could send ripples of generosity that would generate a tide or groundswell of hope. This week's challenge is to work toward attaining freedom from hunger, raise funds for meals, donate in kind, and organize a feeding activity focusing on children, senior citizens, and pregnant women. 6 weeks ago, Ana Patricia Non set up the first community pantry on Maginhawa Street and unknowingly launched an initiative that literally spread a virus of kindness nationwide. Let's now listen in to a dialogue between two economists. Why do economists prescribe solutions that ruin the economy and ecology? Dr. Sixto Rojas answers, that's easy. They choose the firm rather than the household as their basic unit of analysis. The word economics comes from the ancient Greek word oikonomia, meaning household management, and the classical economists viewed the economy through that lens. When the founders of contemporary economics sought to raise economics to the stature of a science by basing it on a mathematical model, they chose the firm because its transactions are monetized and therefore already quantified. Economists have since viewed the economy through the lens of the profit-seeking firm rather than that of the life-seeking household. Indeed, an economic model whose basic unit is the profit-seeking and profit-making firm instead of the life-seeking household has not been totally beneficial to humanity. So we return to our focal point in this summit. How do we create a more inclusive economic system in a lopsided world characterized by inequality? I invite you to visualize this reflection from David Corten, a prominent critic of corporate globalization, who authored When Corporations Rule the World. He also authored a book on Agenda for a New Economy. An image came to mind of development as a pool of money is spreading out across the Asian countryside, consuming life wherever it touched. It was as if money itself had become an evil motive force, absorbing intelligent and highly defined living beings and communities to grow its own featureless bulk. Money consuming life to grow money. Consumed by our quest for money, we fail to notice that we have relinquished control of our lives to the institutions that control our access to money. We accept our enslavement to institutions for which we are merely a means to an end, alien to our own existence and well-being. He presents two alternatives. We will prosper in the pursuit of life, or we will perish in the pursuit of money. The choice is ours. As we believe in the economy of communion, let us choose to prosper in the pursuit of life. Thank you all.